Hi, Kate. It's really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited actually, really excited to talk to you. You've got a fascinating story. Um, I'm particularly interested in sports, and I'm obviously type 1 diabetic. You're type 1 diabetic. You're very interested in sports. And I think that kind of like whole intersection of like sports and how you manage your diabetes in that kind of backdrop is an area that I'm really keen to and really excited to explore with you. Um, for the listeners and viewers, I'd love for you to just sort of give a quick overview of your history, your background, your bio.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Kate Hall. I am 24 years old. I am originally from Maine. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 10 years old. Pretty much from day one, I knew it wasn't going to get in my way of anything, and I wasn't going to let it prevent me from doing what I wanted in life. So I got into track and field when I was actually 10 years old as well. And I started to progress really quickly from the get-go, and I ended up becoming a high school national champion, and I set the national high school record. And then the NCAA championships I won twice, and I went to the 2016 Olympic trials, and it is my ultimate dream to someday become an Olympian. Unfortunately, I tore my ACL, so it's not going to happen this year. But I'm still, I'm looking towards the next one. I'm still young. I still have plenty of time. So my dream is to become an Olympian, and yeah, diabetes isn't going to get in the way of that.
What a bio. Let's go back to age 10. What are your memories like of that period? Because it sounds like two big things are happening: diagnosis with type 1 diabetes, and then the sporting stuff. What are your memories of that period?
Yeah. Yeah, so I started with track, like I said, when I was 10, and it was before my diagnosis. So it was like my first ever year falling in love with this new sport that I just tried. And it was such an exciting time because I already loved sports to begin with. I played all kinds of sports growing up. But then there was this new sport that I was really, really good at and absolutely loved. And then just a few months after, that's when I started not feeling right. I started, I just didn't want to go anywhere. I was, peeing all the time, drinking all kinds
Mm,
of water, eating lots of food, losing weight, just really in a bad mood all the time, which wasn't like me at all. I was always a very, very positive, happy kid, and I didn't really want anyone other than like my immediate family to see any like negative emotions ever.
hmm
But I was at like a birthday party, and I don't remember what happened, but I was upset about something and I was crying. And my cousin, she was there, and she's like, "Whoa, I have never seen you cry. Like, what is going on? Like, no one has ever seen that side of me." And
mm,
that's kind of when my parents knew something really wrong was going on. So they took me to the doctor, and the doctor pretty much just said, "Oh, you're going through a growth spurt because you're eating more."
yeah,
And that didn't make sense at all to me or my parents because I was losing weight. I wasn't
yeah,
growing or gaining weight. I just looked really unhealthy. Um, so he said, "Go home. If you're not feeling good in like a couple weeks, come back. We'll do some more tests."
yeah,
But my parents, like, they didn't wait. They didn't wait for that. As soon as
yeah.
we got home, pretty much started Googling on the internet my symptoms and what I was going through. And the first thing that came up was type 1 diabetes. And they're like, "Oh no, like this is the exact symptoms." They
Yeah,
went to the store and actually got like ketone test strips to test my urine right at home.
yeah.
And it came back like really high. And that's when they pretty much knew, like, oh, it seems like she has type 1 diabetes. So I went to the hospital shortly after, and they checked my blood sugar. It was, I think, in the 500s, so very high. And I very much remember just not being scared, just kind of having a peace about it. I mean, I was very
Yeah,
young, so at the same time, I probably didn't really understand what was happening
yeah,
or I just didn't know what it meant for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I knew it was bad.
Yeah.
But I just had the mindset that, whatever it is, I'm going to get through it. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to deal with it. Um, so the nurse, she was going to give me my first ever shot of insulin. And I took the syringe from her and I was like, no, like I want to give myself my first ever shot.
Wow.
So
Cool.
from like that very first moment, I just like took control of the situation and decided it wasn't going to stop me.
Yeah.
Um, and I very vividly remember staying the night in the hospital, and my mom, she was in the bed with me
Mm.
and she was crying.
Mm.
And I gave her all kinds of attitude. I was like, "Stop crying. Like, why are you crying? Stop it."
Yeah.
And I think after I said that to her, she kind of just felt so much better because she knew
Yeah.
that I was going to be okay.
Yeah.
Um, and just from that moment on, I went home and I was never really afraid of all that it entailed, like
Yeah.
checking blood sugars and dealing with it all day, every day.
Yeah.
But I was scared that it was going to stop me from doing what I loved, which
Yeah.
was sports and specifically track.
Yeah.
Um, so when I first got home, the doctor had told me like, hey, you have to sit out of your championship soccer game because like you're still getting used to this. So
Yeah.
just take it slow. And I
Yeah.
remember being so upset that I like had to sit on the sidelines and
Yeah.
watch my team lose. Um, and that was really hard for me. But at the same time, I'm glad I went through that because that was like a very pivotal moment for me because it just motivated me even more to just not let it get in the way of anything. I was like, oh, this is
Mm.
awful. Like, I never want to go through this again. So just from that time on, I didn't let it stop me. And that's pretty much what I remember from
Mm.
being diagnosed at 10 years old and how I dealt with it. So I was also
That's a
very, very open about it too. And I told all my friends and I was checking all their blood sugars and telling them all about it. So I was very, very open about it.
And so what do you think enabled you to handle it so positively and not get, too down about it at that age? Do you think it's just an innate kind of like perspective that you had back then, or something your parents taught you?
Yeah, I think it was just kind of like an innate perspective that I had. I was just always a very positive child, and I
Yeah.
always dealt with change pretty well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's just kind of how I was, and I just decided in my mind that yeah, it's gonna be hard, but it's not gonna be stop me, and I'm gonna be fine. So.
That's really cool. Do you ever reflect on the period? So the fact that, like, there was this real interest in track and field specifically, I suppose, was it just after or just before the
Just
diagnosis? Just
before.
before.
My
Like, sometimes I look back on my diagnosis. I was 30 years old, and I was kind of like stressed at work, and it didn't occur to me maybe until, like, I don't know, maybe 10 years after, where I looked back and I went, oh, I wonder if like that stress had anything to do with type 1, the initiation, the onset. And so, like, I'm fascinated. Like, do you ever look back and go, or do doctors ever talk to you about it? Do you talk to anyone about, like, what maybe caused it? Is there a clear genetic lineage, or yeah? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I had a distant cousin that had it, but
Yeah.
other than that, no one really in the family, and we can't really think of like a time I was like really sick before then. I don't know, just growing up, just from day one, I always was just smaller than everyone. Just I have a picture of like when I was in preschool and it seemed like I was like a foot shorter than every single
Wow.
person like in the
Yeah.
age group. And like my friends used to make fun of me because I just weighed nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, before my diagnosis, I weighed under 50 pounds at 10 years old. And even before that, I was just super, super tiny. And yeah, I don't know, just growing up in general, I think something was always off.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
don't really
Interesting.
know, but could be part of it.
And have you ever asked a doctor, or has that ever come up in conversation with, anyone with any expertise?
It actually hasn't. It's never been like an in-depth conversation that I've had with a doctor, but it would be interesting to have one for sure.
So I guess it is, I guess it was, I don't know if you call it timely, but like the intersection of like the beginning of a real passion for sports at that time. Talk us through that. Like what was it like managing back then? Because I don't think there were CGMs back then, were there? No.
No, there definitely wasn't.
Which makes it
Yeah,
like even the more impressive, I think. Like I think I've done the odd marathon, way before CGMs were around, and I kind of have a bit of insight into that. But like, I think as a kid, it's even more impressive that you are somehow figuring out how to keep an eye on your levels while this kind of elevated levels of activity were going on.
yeah. I mean, I remember just I was constantly checking my blood sugars. I remember my doctor even said like, "Hey, you're checking it too much. Like, stop checking it so much." I was
Mm,
checking it like 15, 20 times a day, something
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
And they had to tell me to stop. And I also remember using
Why?
like
Why did they want you to
uh,
stop?
I think they didn't want me to stop, but they wanted me to just relax a little bit and not be
Okay.
like focused on it all the time, which
Yeah.
I can understand, but at the same time, like I was comfortable with it. I didn't mind doing it.
Yeah.
Um, so I also remember using a pen. So I wasn't using a pump or anything. I started out with a pen,
Yeah.
um, giving myself shots. I don't know, six times a day whenever I
Mm,
ate.
mm-hmm.
Um, and it's so weird looking back because that's just it's crazy to think about that now, just with
Mm,
how much easier things are now.
mm-hmm.
It's crazy thinking about what it was like when I was first diagnosed. But I dealt with it really well. I didn't mind it. I remember my doctor had told me after a certain amount of time I could try to get a pump.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I got my first pump, I think a year or two after I was diagnosed, and it was a
Yeah.
tubed pump.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, I found that it was harder once I got on a tubed pump because with sports, especially
Yeah.
track,
Yeah.
when I was competing, I did like 3 or 4 events at a time, and it was over the course of like 3 hours. And when you're like sprinting and jumping and warming up,
Yeah.
it's really hard to do that with a tubed pump.
Mm,
And so I found that it kept like falling off me, and eventually I just was like, you know what, I'm just gonna like take it off,
yeah.
which was a really bad idea. I didn't know what else to do because I wanted to compete.
Yeah.
So I would lead competitions with my blood sugar at like 300, 400, sometimes even with ketones because I'd have it off
Yeah.
for so long.
Yeah.
um, and I remember that specifically was a really hard time for me because it was right around the time when I was just starting to get really good in track, but I
So
was
what
also
age was
really
this?
struggling.
Was this still around 10 years
This was
old?
when I was about 12, 13 years
Yeah.
old when this was all happening.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just interesting because I was excelling so much in track, but then struggling so much with keeping my blood sugars in check that
Yeah.
whole time. Um, so that was really hard, and it took me a while to kind of find an alternative because my doctors, they pretty much said, you know, there is no alternative. Like, this is what there is. There's nothing better. So like, don't even go out there and look.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like there was better options out there, and it took us a while to find them.
Yeah.
But once I found a pump that wasn't tubed,
Yeah.
the Omnipod, it just got so much easier for me, and I was able to excel on and off the track. So.
So the Omnipod has been around for a while. For some reason I think of it as being fairly new.
Yeah, it's been around for a while. I think at the time the doctors just, you know, they got some sort of kickback for for the pump that
Yeah.
I was using, so they really want to really tell me about the pump that would better fit me
Yeah.
at the time. So that was really frustrating me, but I found it, and I think everything happens for a reason. So I found it at the time I was supposed to, and
Yeah.
it just made things so much easier for me. And
That's
right,
cool.
pretty much once I got it, it was just I started to excel even more in track and get even better. So.
I think we're getting Omnipod in Australia soon. We don't have it at the moment, which I find weird.
Oh wow.
But then saying that, there's a lot of variation country to country in terms of what medical technologies get there and get registered and so forth. But I don't wear a pump at the moment, but a lot of people keep telling me to get a pump. We'll
Yeah.
see. So um, how did you kind of like, what guidance did you have back then? How did you figure out like how to manage, just not just diabetes, but in with the backdrop of like, high levels of physical activity? Was there other people, like role models? And I guess there have been Olympians, right? And there have been, there's all sorts of impressive athletes out there doing stuff. There's that British rower actually, who was an Olympic gold medalist, and there's probably other people as well. But how did you figure out like how to manage, with because you're not just managing typical type 1, you're managing with this backdrop of like high levels of physical activity, and that's not that usual. So like, where were you getting your guidance from? I imagine your parents were, helping a
Yeah.
lot, but yeah.
Yeah, it was really just like the support system that I had in my life. I did have role models, but I think it was really just the people around me that really helped me and motivated me to um, be the best that I could be. My
Yeah.
parents, they did a really good job of kind of letting me do my thing with diabetes.
Hmm.
They weren't overbearing.
Cool.
I was a very, very independent child, and I
Yeah.
wanted to do everything by myself. And they did a really good job of letting me do things by myself, and
Sweet.
they were there for when I needed them. They came alongside me with my diabetes management and with all my sports and everything. But they weren't constantly over my shoulder saying like, "Hey, what's your blood sugar? Check your blood sugar. Do
Yeah.
this, do that."
Wow.
So they
That must
really
have been
gave me.
tough for them. I imagine, like, as a parent, like, I imagine I'd want to keep my kid alive, right? So I'd be like, I imagine
Right.
I'd fall into like some kind of like helicopter parent mode potentially.
Right. I don't know how they did it, but they trusted me because they knew that I wasn't going to do anything crazy. I was going
Yeah.
to manage it the best I could. They were there all the time, making
Yeah.
sure I was okay. They
Yeah.
just didn't constantly tell me what to do. So there was a really good balance that we had. And I think that was kind of key for helping me not only with my diabetes management, but just with track in general, because from a very young age, I had to have that work ethic to control my diabetes. I had to check my blood sugar several times a day and count carbs and figure all that out from age 10. And I wanted to do it by myself. But that kind of instilled in me a really good work ethic from a really young age.
Mm,
So I think once I fell in love with track and started to get better, it was working at it to get better was nothing because I had
mm,
been doing it since I was 10 years old with my diabetes.
mm,
So working out and doing everything I could to
mm-hmm.
improve was easy for me, and it was actually fun because I was able to set goals for every season, and I had goals for each event and goals for
Yeah.
every year, and I'd cross them off if I achieved them, and if I didn't, I would write next to it and say, "Oh, next year I'll get it" or whatever. So it was really fun for me, and I really think that I was able to work so hard because I was diagnosed at a young age. So
I sometimes look at it like, in some senses I have an advantage in that I have an insight into my metabolism or into my glucose levels, into the impact that food has on me, that actually your average person doesn't necessarily have, because they're not constantly monitoring the impact of food on their bodies. And I think actually even like the research is mounting about like non-diabetics using insulin for things like bodybuilding. Um,
right.
and so I imagine in some senses, like the relationship that you gain with your body and your, the system of your body, it gives you an advantage being an athlete, because you just kind of have a better sense of like what's happening, because you're monitoring it so closely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that for sure. Like I am so like in touch with my body. Like I know what I can and can't take in my training. So
Yeah.
for diabetics, like diabetics need more recovery than like the average athlete. So
They see more
for
recovery.
Yeah, need more recovery.
Oh, they
Because
need more recovery. Okay, gotcha.
yeah,
Sorry.
they need more recovery. So like I found in college, when I was, training with my teammates and we were all doing the same thing every day, that I wasn't fully recovered when they were. So I felt like I was, training at like maybe 80% in practice when they were at 100%. So
Yeah,
now
right.
that I'm with a coach that knows me and knows about type 1,
Yeah.
um, just really in tune with kind of how my body reacts to workouts and the recovery I need, and that's really an advantage for me, because I'm so in tune with it. So I definitely agree with what you said about that.
Do you have like back when you were a kid, you were sort of saying you had to figure it out on your own with your parents and so forth. Do you have like more? Do you have better help now? Like, and do you have any role models, type 1 diabetics who are operating at the same level you're at from a physical performance level?
Yeah, I mean, I follow other type 1 diabetics on social media that are really good athletes, and not just athletes, but just they make a positive
Mm-hmm.
impact in the community. So definitely look up to them. Yeah, so it's really cool to be part of a community that can make such a big difference all over the world. So it's
Yeah.
awesome.
What's your biggest source of information? Like, and what are the things you're looking to kind of, I don't know, what are the challenge? Well, actually, what were the challenge? What were the biggest challenges when you were a kid? Like, because you talk about it really positively. Was it all positive, or was there any kind of was there any times where you like looked around and went, the people you're competing against, for example, who didn't have type 1 diabetes, did you ever have moments where you're like you couldn't keep up, or there was something happening and it impacted your relative performance? And what were the challenges back then and kind of now? I guess there's two
Yeah.
parts of the question, like because they'd be different, but I'm curious to know kind of what they were then and what they are now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, some of the challenges I've had in the past, I remember my first ever pretty big challenge that I had was at a conference championship meet in high school,
Mm,
and it was really exciting because it was one of the biggest meets of the year, and I was trying to win all 3 events and trying to set records. So I remember going, and I didn't have my CGM at the time. But I remember checking my blood sugar on the bus and it was really high. So I gave a bunch of insulin and then I got there, I started warming up, and all of a sudden I had a very low blood sugar. And I
yeah.
realized that my blood sugar that I took on the bus probably wasn't accurate and it wasn't actually that high.
Okay.
So it was very low and I was just about to compete. I was not feeling good. And I went and I was doing long jump. I pushed off of the runway to start my approach, and my calf cramped. And I was like,
Your
oh
what,
no,
sorry? Oh, your
my,
calf cramp. Okay, yeah,
my calf
sorry.
cramp.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had remember like either my doctor or my coach telling me that when your blood sugars go high and low, your pH level changes, which can cause muscle cramps.
Mm-hmm.
So I instantly knew it was because of my low blood sugar. I had no doubt in my mind that's why I
Mm,
cramped.
mm,
Um, and I had to sit out the rest of the meet. I couldn't compete in the rest of long jump. I couldn't
mm,
do the 200 meter. And it was devastating because I mean, I absolutely loved track and field and
mm,
I couldn't do what I loved. And I was devastated.
yeah.
So that was a huge struggle for me. But at the same time, I believe like I had to go through that so that next time I could do better. So now I make sure that I check my blood sugar well before I'm on the
Mm,
bus 30 minutes away from the competition. So even though that was hard, I'm glad it happened when it did. So I didn't have to deal with it later in life at a bigger competition. Um, so that was the struggle that I had back like in high school. But to this day, I still have struggles.
mm,
And I think one of my biggest ones is adrenaline.
mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with my blood sugars at really big competitions when I have a lot of adrenaline.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a huge competitor and I get really nervous, but in a good way. So I have a lot of adrenaline in my system, and it skyrockets my blood sugar every single time.
Mm,
So I will almost always go into a competition with my blood sugar 140, 150, at a pretty good level that I want it to be. And then as soon as I start competing, it goes straight up. It goes up to 200, 300, sometimes like 350, something
Mm.
insane. Um, and then since it goes up that high, it affects me even after the competition, because then I'm having to deal with it coming down. My muscles feel like they're going to cramp. And then because of that, I can't sleep well at night, because I'm just trying to just come down from that really high blood sugar, and all that adrenaline is like still in my system. So it's really frustrating when I go through times like those, because that's when I feel like I have a disadvantage, and
Yeah.
I never want to feel like I have a disadvantage because of my diabetes. But I do realize that there are ways to prevent that and fix that. It's just kind of finding the right methods that work for me. So that's still something I'm trying to learn and something I struggle with, but I know it will get easier the more I compete and the more I learn. So.
Does being high during an event affect your performance? Like, so let's say, you're about to go and do long jump and your blood sugar's high. Is there any sort of research or evidence around whether that's a good or bad thing for your performance in that moment?
Um, I don't know if there's specific research, but from what I have experienced, I don't think that having my blood sugar um, a little high affects my performance. I think if it's really high, which I've had a couple times, it could affect it.
Mm.
But I actually remember, I totally forgot about this, but the first time I won the NCAA championships, my pump fell off.
Mm.
So I was competing with no pump, and the competition was like an hour and a half. So my blood sugar was really high throughout the competition and continuing to go up because I had no pump on.
Yeah.
And I won the competition and jumped one of the best I've ever jumped. So I haven't noticed really anything negative from jumping with a high blood sugar, but I'm sure that if it was at a good level, I might jump a little bit better, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Really interesting. So tell us about you've had some big wins at a high school level and at the NCAA level. Tell us about those experiences. I imagine a massive amount of focus and effort went into them. How did it feel to kind of be making those achievements?
I mean, I guess I'll go back to the start, but when I was a freshman in high school, I was watching the 2012 Olympic trials on TV.
Mm.
And when I was watching the trials, I said in that moment that I was going to be at the 2016 trials. And at that point, I was only jumping 16 feet. I don't know what that is in meters, but
What is that?
16 feet in the long jump at that time, which is a huge difference in what the pros were jumping at the trials. So I told my parents,
4.8
hey,
meters.
oh, is it? Yeah.
So how old were you then when you were jumping 4.8 meters? What age?
I was, there it goes. I was 15 years old.
Yeah, cool. That's impressive.
And 15 years old, and I was watching the pros jump, 680, 690, 7 meters. So a huge gap. But I
Mm.
said to my parents, I am going to be at the 2016 trials, competing with the best of the best. And they
Mm.
kind of laughed at me. Well, they didn't laugh at me, but like inside they laughed, like, I
Yeah.
don't think that's going to happen. But obviously, they supported me and did everything they could to help me to get me there.
Yeah.
So from that moment on in high school, every year I was setting goals. So for my freshman year, I wanted to jump 17 feet. And then for my sophomore year, I want to jump 18 feet. And that really motivated me to work as hard as I could every single year. And my junior year of high school was when I really had a breakthrough, and I was jumping just under 20 feet.
Yeah.
And I was like runner up at the high school nationals. And then my senior year was the year that I just absolutely was at the top of my game and ended up totally skipping over 21 feet and jumped
Wow.
22 feet 5 inches at the high school nationals on my last ever jump of my high school career.
Wow.
So
So actually, just to give us context, what's the current world record for women's and men's?
so the world record is, I think it's around like 760. That might not be completely accurate, but it's around there. And
Yeah,
then men's, I'm not sure what the men's world record is, but if you see someone jump like 899
yeah,
meters, that's like absolutely incredible.
yeah. Okay.
Unheard of, really. So that's pretty much like the
That's
best of the
amazing.
best.
Absolutely amazing. And so, yeah, so
Yeah, so
that was
it
your,
was
so end of high school, you were jumping, what was it again? 22 feet?
683. Yeah,
Okay.
683 meters was my best in
Yeah.
high school.
Amazing.
Yeah, and career after that, I had already kind of committed to attending a school in the fall for college.
Hmm.
But I ended up transferring after only one semester there because the training just didn't fit what I needed, and my body just felt like it was breaking down, and I wasn't being taken care of on the diabetes side. I also have
Hmm.
celiac. And I remember being on the bus and they would order everyone like sandwiches, but not get me a gluten-free sandwich. So I would like go without eating.
God.
So it was a big struggle my first year because I went from absolutely excelling in high school and setting the national record to just kind of going downhill and feeling like my body was breaking and not having the support that I needed. So I ended up transferring and then going to the University of Georgia, and that's where I ended up winning 2 NCAA championships, and it was so much better there. But I decided to actually leave there a year early because I kind of was going back into that same um, feeling that I had my first year when my body was kind of breaking down. So I just realized that the NCAA scene wasn't for me, and
Yeah.
that I needed to be with a coach that knew about type 1,
Yeah.
knew about how to train me with the recovery I needed. So I
Hmm.
kind of dropped everything without really knowing what was next. I didn't really have a plan other than I wanted to make the Olympics, and I knew that I had to be with this coach to do that. So I left before my senior year and went back to Maine and started training with the coach that I have now, and it was probably the best decision I've ever made. So,
What's
yeah.
the NCAA scene? Did I hear you correctly? The NCAA scene, I think was the
Yeah,
terminology you
yeah.
used. What's that? What does that mean?
So like the Division 1 college scene, the NCAA is like a conference. It's like the best in the US. So like
Mm.
the NCAA championships, that's like the best of the best, and it's very cutthroat and a lot of pressure, and people travel from all over the world to train to compete
Right.
at the NCAA's colleges in the US. So yeah,
And
it's
do
incredible.
you just have, is it just the coaches that are at the university or the college, I think you say, is it the coaches that you're just, it's the coaches that are there that are your coach? It's not like you get to have your own coach in that thing. It's just you're part of a group, I suppose, and you're just, you get what you're given.
Yeah, exactly. You're part of a team, and so I was recruited by all kinds of colleges from all over the U.S. So I pretty much had my pick when I was in high school
Yeah.
for which one I wanted. But it's hard because a lot of the college coaches they have one personality when you're being recruited, and then a totally different personality when you're actually there. They
Yeah, of
act like
course.
they're your best friend
Yeah.
before you're actually there, but when you're there, it's a totally different story. And it was kind of devastating to learn that and to realize that my dreams that I had for the NCAA weren't gonna come true because it was totally different than what I
Yeah.
imagined. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I wanted to do everything I could to accomplish my dream, even if that
Mm.
meant dropping everything and leaving early and not finishing my degree at that school at that time. So it was hard,
Yeah,
but
it
it was
must be hard if you are an athlete who does have, you know, different or specific requirements that are different to, the group, to get those catered to. It would be challenging, I imagine, because you're kind of there going, but my body is different and I need, different training regimes and different diets and so forth. And I imagine that it sounds like a really, really intelligent decision to go and do your own thing.
Yeah, it was a hard decision, but it was the right one. But I think that these colleges, they weren't prepared for everything that diabetes entails. So
Yeah.
they were actually in charge of like ordering all my supplies for me, because since I went there, I could get the supplies free through the
Yeah.
school.
Cool.
Um, and I remember I had run out of my pod, my Omnipod, and I only had like a few left, and they were supposed to order them like weeks and weeks back.
Yeah.
And we were about to leave for the NCAA championships in 2017, and I only had one more left. So I was kind of like
Jesus.
wondering, am I gonna get my pods before I go, or like what's gonna happen? So they ended up just like contacting a local rep in the area and got me a box of pods, but it's like these should have been ordered
Yeah.
like weeks ago. But they just didn't really care or just do their job. And for me, that wasn't acceptable, because like at that point, I should be worrying about my competition. I should be
Yeah.
thinking, I need to be getting ready for jumping the best I ever have. I need to get ready to hopefully win this thing. But instead, I'm worrying about if I'm getting my pump supplies, and it's extremely stressful. So when that started happening, and just a combination of that and just the training just not working well for my body, it was like I need to be done with this. I need to move on. So it was a good decision.
So how did you end up in long jump? I imagine you're in track and field and it's the thing you're doing the best at. Is that how, or was it like, did you at some point go, I just love this so much that I only want to do this?
So when I was younger, I was always jumping around everywhere. I would, every time I went under like a door frame, I would jump up and hit it with my hand every single
Yeah.
time. Um,
OCD.
I would, I would, I would jump up and try to hit ceilings in my house. I was just always jumping all the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like think at that time, oh, look, I want to be a long jumper someday. It was just something that I just did naturally.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I first got into track, um, I didn't really even know long jump was a thing, but once I tried it, I was just a natural at it. I was just always really, really fast as a kid. And then when you combine that with being able to jump high and far in the air,
Yeah.
it's just the perfect combination. So I was just a natural from the start, and I absolutely love the feeling of like flying through the air. So
Yeah.
right when I started doing it, I was like, yep, this is the event that I like. So
I've seen some of the posts on your social media of you training, and like some of the stuff that you're doing is pretty bizarre. I mean, you can kind of see you can sort of see where it's coming from, but it's still like, to the average person, it's like pretty bizarre types of exercises or, techniques that you're practicing.
yeah, a lot of the things I do, you wouldn't see many other people do, because I mean, part of it is just getting your body stable and moving correctly and functioning well before you even do anything else. So before I
Yeah.
do all these crazy lifting or crazy jumping exercises, I need to make sure my body's moving correctly. So a lot of these like weird little exercises that I'm doing is to make sure that I am moving correctly, so that I don't get injured and I can perform well. So
Tell us about the Olympic trials.
in 2016,
Yeah.
yeah. So the Olympic trials. So when I set the national high school record, that had qualified me for the Olympic trials. That hit the Olympic standard. And then when I jumped that, I accomplished my goal of hitting the mark to go. So
And
I
where
was
just in terms of that, at that point when you qualified, how
at,
many how many people were jumping around the same distance as you? Was there a fairly small group at that point? Is there 100? Is there 10? Or what's the general kind of US landscape like in terms of like at those, people at those sorts of distances?
so I mean, at that level in high school, I was definitely the only one jumping that
Okay.
distance. But
Yeah.
before I jumped that 683 meters, there was probably a group of two or three of us that was
Wow.
jumping like 640
Okay.
ish.
Yeah.
So a very small group. But
Yeah.
then when I jumped the national record, there wasn't really anyone close close to that.
And was that the all-time record that you set at that point? Like
Yeah.
you had jumped the longest for anyone at high school, was it at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the record stood for like 39 years. So it was a
No
really old
way.
record. And then I broke it in 2015.
That's
So that
cool.
was such an
That's
incredible
so
moment.
amazing. Yeah.
It wasn't even on my radar to break the record. It was just on my radar to win the competition and become a national champion. But
Yeah.
I just had like the perfect jump and everything went perfectly. And I was able to set the record. And there's a really cool video of my reaction when I see on the board what the distance is.
Yeah.
And I didn't know the conversion from meters to feet. So at first I saw meters. I was like, oh, that's pretty far.
Yeah.
And then when I saw it in feet, I was like, what did I just do? And I like, my hands were up in the air and I'm like crying. And
That's amazing.
it was just unbelievable. And I mean, by jumping that qualified me for the trials. And that was my goal since I was 15 years old, a freshman in high school. So I was able to go to the trials in 2016. And unfortunately, that was right after the time that I had transferred from my first school that I went to. So my body wasn't really at its peak condition at that time because I had only had a couple months to kind of recover from my body just feeling so run into the ground that I had a really good first day at the trials and qualified for the finals the next day. But at the next day, my body just felt really tired from the day before and I wasn't able to go on from there. But I always kind of told myself that my goal in 2016 was to make the trials and compete and do as well as I possibly could. But then the next Olympics that I went to try to qualify for, I was gonna make. So.
And was that difficult for you? Like mentally, was it, how did you feel?
Yeah. So I'm actually really hard on myself when I don't compete well. So I'm a very positive person in general, and I don't like to let people see when I'm struggling with something. I've always been like that. But when it comes to competing, if I don't do well, I'm really, really hard on myself for days. And I was happy with my performance on my first day. It had been better than I jumped in a while because I was back with the coach that was best for me. So he got me to that point and I was jumping pretty well. But I also wanted to do really well on the day of the finals. And I obviously didn't want to make the team because that's why I was there. But, I just had to kind of think of the year that I had and like, it was a really hard year. I struggled, but I got past it. And at that point, I was only like 19 years old. So huge career ahead of me. So once I was kind of able to process it in that way, then it was fine. And it just motivated me to keep working hard. So
I've got an uplifting question coming up, but seeing as though we're on like the challenges, let's jump into the ACL injury. Because that I imagine is a pretty challenging experience. And like sometimes I think it hits home. Like let's say I'm watching the NBA and I see an injury in the NBA, and I think about a guy, Klay Thompson, for example, who's been out for like 2 years or something now, or anyone. I just kind of like feel for people whose. I mean, having an injury sucks for anyone, but like someone who is that's there. It's your it's a primary focus for you is like, using your body for whatever it is, work-wise, just in a professional kind of context. So, what happened and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, so it was funny because not funny, but ironic that it was actually a week before I was going to compete for the first time in a year because of the pandemic. So I hadn't been able to compete for a full year because of COVID. I was finally just 1 week away from my first competition.
Oh my God.
And I was going to compete on a really nice track that I was really excited about because there's always really far jumps there because it's super bouncy. And I was training in the weight room and I was doing a plyometric drill. So I had 2 smaller boxes and then a larger box. And I was starting on a smaller box, and then I was taking like a quick step down to the ground and then another quick step onto the other smaller
Mm-hmm.
box, and then jumping off of that smaller box onto the biggest box. And I was landing on one leg. So it's almost
Mm-hmm.
kind of like I was running up to the bigger box, but I was stepping on the smaller boxes on my
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah.
So on the first attempt, I kind of took it easy just to kind of get a feel for it. And the second attempt, I was a little bit more comfortable and went at it a little bit harder. And then on my third attempt, I just like gave it everything I had. And unfortunately, because I went a little bit faster and a little bit harder, I
Mm-hmm.
landed too far I landed on the outside edge of the box instead of the
Mm-hmm.
middle. So when I landed on the outside edge, it tipped over and I was falling as the box was kind of like rolling where I
Yeah.
was falling.
Yeah.
Um, so I stuck my left leg out to try to catch my fall, and I hyperextended my knee and then like landed on the box. And then as soon as I landed, it was just like so much pain in my knee. And I was like, oh no, like I think it hyperextended.
Mm.
Um, but at that point, I thought it was just a hyperextension. I didn't think it was anything else.
Yeah.
And then my coach was right there, and he was worried that it might be something else. But in my mind, I was like, no, like I'm fine. Like I feel better now. It's just sore because I hyperextended it. But I wasn't letting my mind go to like that it could be a major injury. But then I ended up having an MRI like 2 days later, and that's when they said it was an ACL tear, and that was really hard because I was just about to compete. It was the Olympic year. I've been working years and years for this, and then I tore my ACL, which was something that I never ever imagined would happen. Like I always
Yeah.
imagined if I was injured, it'd be like a hamstring injury or like a quad injury, but never like an ACL.
Yeah.
So it was really hard to go through that. And I'm still processing it to this day. And this week is honestly going to be really hard for me because it's the week of the trials, and everyone's there right now. Everyone's getting ready for it, and I'm here at home recovering from my injury, just trying to get back to jogging. So
That's
it's going to be hard,
is that
but
the
I
stage
think
you're at
everything happens for
actually?
it.
Just so actually the trials
Yeah.
they're every 4 years, the trials?
Yeah, they're every 4 years. And then it got delayed because of COVID. So
Okay.
it was
Yeah.
supposed to be last year, but it's this year. So everyone's there now, and the trials start on Friday. So like if
Yeah.
I was totally healthy, I would be there getting ready for it right now. So it's been a hard past week, and I know it's only going to get harder for the next like 10 days. But it is what it is, and I'm trying my best to recover and get back to where I need to be. So
And so then another 4 years, and is that what's the rehab process been like, and like what are your thoughts about the next trials?
so the next trials are actually going to be 3 years from now
Yeah.
because they are still calling it 2020 Olympics.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
um, that's I'm happy that it's going to be 3 years from now instead
Yeah,
of
I
four
bet you are.
years. But my goal is to be ready for the indoor season, which will start in January. And the
Yeah.
World Championships are also next year, and they're going to be in Oregon. So it'll be pretty local.
Cool.
It won't be in a
Yeah.
different country. So as long as I'm ready by then that's kind of what I'm working towards right now. So
Cheering for you.
thank you. Thank you.
And the rehab process, what's that been like?
So it's been harder than I thought, just because obviously I haven't been through a major injury before. I have seen others go through major injuries, but you don't really know what it's like until you go through it. So the first couple weeks were really, really hard because I couldn't walk. So I was on crutches, but it was also very painful at the same time. And it just moving around was really scary and really hard.
Mm.
And I was very weak. And then at 4 weeks, I was off of crutches and walking around in a brace. And then by like 6 or 7 weeks, I was out of my brace. And then I think it's been like the past 3 or 4 weeks, I finally started walking without a limp. So now I'm walking completely normal. I am doing a little bit of jogging. Today was the first day that I was able to jump rope. Um,
Today?
a couple days ago. Yeah, today I jumped
That's
rope for the
exciting.
first time
Awesome.
before my injury. And I've been doing some box jumps, which is really exciting, just because jumping is my event. So I'm glad to be back to some jumping. But I think the goal right now is to get back to some faster running and some sprinting. So um, that's kind of the next step. And I think I'm hoping by the end of next month to be back to some faster running. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So the uplifting question, the feeling, like, what do you have, like, memories of your favorite jumps? And are they always your longest jumps? Like, I imagine they would be, like, the ones that where you feel, I don't know, whatever you feel that what like tell us about your kind of, I mean, is it that one that you mentioned earlier? Are there other jumps where that stand out in terms of, like, you just felt everything clicked in that moment?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely the best jumps that I've had have been the ones that I remember the most. I would say, yeah, my national high school record is a big one. But that was interesting because it wasn't like that whole day everything clicked. It was just like that one jump. So my jumps before that, they were just okay. They didn't feel that great, but that one jump, just everything fell into place,
Yeah.
which is something I had never experienced before. And then I've had some other competitions where just everything felt perfect for the day. And for example, I jumped in the middle of Boston a couple of years ago, and they just built this runway like right in the middle of the city, and it was
Yeah.
just built from like boards.
Yeah.
And it was the most amazing thing. And that day, it was just like everything clicked, and like every single one of my jumps just felt absolutely incredible. And I was like, just the feeling of hitting the board perfectly and just like shooting up into the air and just going like getting so much height and then going so far out into the pit. It just
Yeah.
was like really effortless that day. And that's definitely like a feeling that I won't forget. And
Yeah.
those are the best days of competing. It's just like when everything clicks, because then it's just so effortless and easy and it's enjoyable. So
That's so
it's
cool.
amazing.
That's really cool. Tell us about, like, your current diabetes management. Tell us about, like, give us some insight into your diet. I mean, you're using Omnipods, so that kind of gives us a bit of insight into insulin dosing, but, like, really curious to understand, like, just what what your days are like in terms of diabetes, how you're managing, and just the different kind of considerations that you have. I suppose since you've been in rehab, has it been different to when you're? I mean, I imagine it's quite different in terms of the management in general.
Yeah, yeah, it's been interesting through the rehab. I mean, when I first had my surgery, I knew my blood sugars were going to be a little bit high because I wasn't
Mm,
going to be as active.
mm-hmm,
So I ended up lowering my basal rates for the first like week after my surgery,
mm-hmm,
um, and that actually helped a lot. And then from there, once I started my rehab consistently, I was able to kind of go back to like a normal, my normal rates. And I've always noticed that whenever I'm exercising consistently, my blood sugars are always so much better.
mm-hmm.
So whenever I take breaks from exercising for like a couple weeks or a month, my blood sugars are always so much higher, and I always have
Yeah.
to figure out how to deal with that. But it's nice to know that exercising always makes it just so much easier to
Mm-hmm.
manage. Um, so once I started with my rehab, it kind of went back to just a nice spot that I was used to having before my surgery. And just as far as training goes, it's really interesting because my blood sugars tend to go low during my training, but like I said, they go high during competitions.
Yeah.
So for when I'm doing my sprint workouts and my jumping and my lifting, I'm always having to either eat before my workouts or setting a temp basal about an hour and a half before my workouts. So what I found works the best for me is if I decrease my basal rate by like 40% an hour and a half before my workouts,
Mm-hmm.
I won't go low. And
Okay.
that was a game changer for me because I always found that even if I had a little snack before, it still didn't really help. It would still go low or it would just go high. But setting that temp basal before my workouts made a huge, huge difference for me.
And
So
and
that's pretty much something I'm doing.
when you're in when you're competing or training really hard in those intense periods, is your need for a short acting, and I don't actually know that much about the Omnipod, but is your need for short acting insulin almost nil?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of workout, honestly. If I'm doing like a very high intensity workout, where I'm just gonna be working really hard, then yeah, I might not need any throughout that whole period. But if I'm doing maybe like a short lift for the day, then
Mm-hmm.
usually just decreasing my basal rate by a little bit will do the trick. So it really
Okay.
depends on the workout. So
And your diet, what's the diet like in particularly in like the high intense training periods? How often are you eating?
um,
What are you eating?
yeah, so I mean, so I have celiac, so I have to take that into consideration as well. So I'm having to deal with gluten free, and it's especially hard when I'm traveling in other countries because a lot of countries they don't have gluten free.
Yeah.
So that's been a struggle for sure. But I mean, when I'm in an intense training period, I'm eating more because I'm working harder. So my body needs more fuel. So I'm eating more, I'm having more carbs. And then just, during that period, it might be a little bit harder to manage my blood sugars if I'm eating more meals and having more carbs. But it's gotten easier as the years have gone on. So.
Any thoughts on like the high level athletes who are keto, who are
Um,
like who are doing like a non carb diet?
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do it just because I think that, if you're training hard, you need carbs for energy.
Yeah.
So I mean, if it works for them, that's great because everyone is different. But for me, I know that wouldn't work. So
Okay, so it sounds like with this time that you've had in rehab, and it's I think it's probably speaks to your character, which I think we've kind of heard about from the beginning, which is, you're pretty resilient and you've got a pretty positive outlook. You have not just sat around in the last how long has it been? 12 months maybe. It sounds like you've been pretty productive. Tell us what you've been up to.
yeah. So well, I was injured back in January. And then so I don't know, was that 5 months ago?
Yeah, five
um,
months ago.
Yeah, and then I had my surgery in February, and then about a month after my surgery, I had a friend come over, and he was just checking on me, and he mentioned, "Oh, like it would be cool if you started a nonprofit." And it was funny because at that time it was never something that had crossed my mind, but people always would ask me what I wanted to do after my track and field career. And I would always say something to do with diabetes advocacy and something to do with training athletes. But I didn't really know what that looked like, and in what setting that would be.
Mm,
But when he said that, it just kind of clicked to me. It's like, well, with the nonprofit, we could do both of those things. And I wouldn't have to wait until after my track and field career. I could do it now because I have all this
yeah,
time on my hands, and I don't want to sit there and, look back about, well, what if I did this? What if I did that?
yeah,
How could I have changed what happened? If I can, do something productive and change someone's life in the process, then I honestly think that my injury would be worth it because I think everything happens for a reason. So we worked really hard from March until now,
yeah.
and we just launched the nonprofit that's called DiaStrong about a week ago.
Awesome.
And I honestly think it's made this whole process so much easier for me because mentally,
Yeah,
because I don't know what I would have done if I wasn't doing that because I pretty much just would have been doing my physical therapy,
yeah.
and that's about it. But
Thinking about the trials.
exactly. But I think, I was able to turn kind of a negative into a positive, And yeah, we're doing this so we can change lives and make it easier for other diabetics. We want to provide resources for them, and we want to provide education for them, and we want to provide workout resources for them to kind of show them how they can manage their diabetes in an athletic or a fitness setting. And then another big part of what we want to do is provide financial support for diabetics out there, because um, having diabetes is expensive.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of people can't even afford anything, and that's
Yeah.
extremely sad. So we really want to just kind of get the word out there so that we can help these people out and help them pay for their supplies. So we are extremely excited about it. And yeah, it's been a whirlwind, but we're really happy. So
Congratulations. I mean, I think setting up not-for-profits is not that easy. I've never done it, but the little bit of insight I've had is like there's quite a few hoops you have to jump through. So congratulations.
yeah, there definitely is quite a few hoops, but we have a good team, and we all
And you're good
play
at
our
jumping.
yeah, right.
Yeah, kind of like like when some of the questions I was asking earlier were a bit like I was curious about the support structures and kind of like the advice and information that exists out there for like people who are wanting to pursue something related to athletics, right? And with diabetes. And I think that like it sounds like a little bit of what you're going to be doing is going to be focused on supporting some of those
Yeah.
people and giving resources, which is awesome. And I think that also like the idea that someone is sitting in the US and having to spare their insulin because they can't afford it is, it's a travesty. Like it's just, and it's also why we you give some of our profits back to Insulin Access for All, because like just that concept is mind blowing. So it's really cool that you're helping anyone, I think, in that realm.
Thank you. Yeah, it really is very sad. And I know of quite a few people, even in the area that I live, that struggle a lot with it. And it's just like, it's mind blowing that there's that many people out there that are struggling, and it's really sad. So we're hoping that we can make a difference, not only in the community that we live, but just all over. So.
Okay, so well, thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah,
Really, like such a fascinating story. You're such an impressive individual.
thank you.
Just as we wrap up with regards to the DiaStrong Foundation, like if there's people listening, how can people support?
I mean, if you want to support, you can go check out our page and subscribe, become a member, donate, get the word out there. Right now, we're honestly just trying to get the word out there because we want to help people. So the more we can get this out there, the more people we could potentially help. So anyone that can help us get it out there, that's what's important right now. So.
It's so good to chat to you, Kate. Appreciate your time, and kind of whatever you do, I suppose, wish you the best. If you do end up at the Olympic trials in 3 years' time, I'll definitely be cheering for you. Just really wish you the best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Take care. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.